Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to yet more 140k lore, where today we are going to be talking about the disgusting, filthy Abhuman scum. Twee. Granted, they're not quite as filthy and disgusting as mutant scum, but it's pretty goddamn close. But, I hear you yelp, is there even a difference? Very, very good question. Very good question indeed. Personally, I think we should just exterminate the lot of them and clean out the human gene pool, but sadly, my more rational and frankly compassionate ideas have been rejected on this matter, and we're just going to have to suffer their existence. It really is tragic, but there you are. So, the difference between an abhuman and a filthier, dirtier mutant is that an abhuman is a relatively stable form of mutation. And we also subdivide the term mutation into two different categories. Natural mutations, as in the case of the Beastmen, and yeah, they do actually exist in 40k, and they are also loyal. Well, for the most time anyways, and even the most times arguable. Anyways, moving on, and biologically engineered mutations, as is the case with the Afrial Strain. These, of course, are large swaths of a population that have been genetically engineered for one purpose or another, be it to be better warriors or to simply be better adapted at living in the environment they are currently residing in. Both of them are considered abhumans if they are stable genetic variants upon baseline humanity. In other words, they were at one point a mutation or a genetical engineering, but these days they are capable of procreating and recreating said mutations in their offspring. This is why, whilst the Adeptus Astartes would technically fall under the biologically engineered category, they are not considered abhumans because, of course, they can't procreate, and as such, they cannot continue to create new stable mutants. There are currently 73 stable abhuman strains blighting Imperial records, of which 46, luckily, has been wiped from existence. And a further 12 have either been wiped out and Imperial bureaucracy simply hasn't caught up to the fact yet, or been integrated along with the rest of the Imperial population to the point where they are no longer a truly unique breed. This can happen in two different ways. Either the stable mutant breed is getting outbred by the human population, essentially a filthy, dirty, horrible mutant has sex with an actual, pure, proper human. Why anyone would do such a horrible thing is beyond me, but hey, and they create an actual human child. This can then eventually lead to the death, quote-unquote, of the unique strain. Another possibility is that they used to have a status somewhat separate to the Imperium, as was, for example, with the example of the Squats, who, after having lost their homeworlds, got integrated along with the wider Imperium and simply became normal, regular Imperial citizens. Or, well, kinda. We'll get into the whole citizen thing in a moment. The remaining strains of abhumans that we know of, then, are the Afrial Strain, Beastmen, Gland Warriors, Nightsiders, Ogres, Rattlings, Scalies, Squats, Troths, Pelagiers, Felinids, and Neandors. There are a couple more that are doubtful, kinda. For example, the Goliath house in Necromunda is by many considered to be an abhuman species, as they are primarily vat-grown, which states that they are a relatively stable form of mutation that is supposedly also capable of procreation. I think it's probably a bit of a technicality. I personally wouldn't label them abhumans because they are more grown rather than bred most of the time, but again, technicality. Another one would be the Longshanks, which we heard about during the War of the Beasts, but it is unclear whether or not they were wiped out during that war, or if they still exist. And of course, we have one further example of a rather fascinating little species, the Navigators. The very selfsame psychists who guide the Imperium starships through the void. They are, technically, an abhuman species known as Homo Navigo. it is a very, very, very unique and particular form of abhuman that is fully sanctioned within the Imperium and are given, well, considerable rights and incredible amounts of wealth because, well, without them, the Imperium literally could not function. This means that they have avoided most of the problems that the rest of the abhumans have. And this, of course, returns us quite neatly to the question of citizenship. The Imperium, as most of you already know, is a rather, intolerant society, shall we say. They're not particularly fond of everything that isn't human, and whilst abhumans are, technically speaking, recognized subhuman strains, that's not really good enough, is it? And thusly, they are regularly subjected to considerable amounts of, discrimination. It does vary, for example, in the case of the navigators. The navigators might be hated and feared and, well, again, it depends on the system. In some systems and in some sectors, the navigators are viewed almost as badly as uncontrolled psychers. They are viewed as pet dogs to be kept on a very, very tight leash, but they are still recognized as useful. In other stratas of society, they are actually considered to be pretty damn honorable and, generally speaking, a very important part of society. The various navigator noble houses, for example, are some of the most powerful organizations within the Imperium. In other cases, you have strains of abhumans that have developed into human society and are accepted to be pretty damn decent. An example of this would of course be the Squats, who seem to live side by side with the Imperium with very, very little in the way of friction. And on the completely opposite side of the spectrum again, we have the Beastmen that are, well, you know how mutants are even more hated than abhumans? Well, Beastmen are just on that line. They are basically tipping kind of back and forth on the line between being utterly hated as mutants and technically being accepted as abhumans. Thusly, it depends upon the species in question, but generally speaking, abhumans will be treated with a certain level of disdain in wider imperial society, and they usually will not enjoy the same rights and privileges. As if such a fucking thing exists within the Imperium. Excuse me. They will usually enjoy even less rights and privileges than your average Imperial citizen. Yes, that makes a lot more sense. Now, let's talk a little bit about the primary difference in society and the whole civilian status between abhumans and mutants. Now, as I've already said, the main difference is that abhumans are a stable strain, whereas mutants, of course, are, by their very definition, a non-stable strain. Now, they do exist within human society, kind of. They are generally allowed to exist, although they are in no way accommodated. They, generally speaking, are not treated as citizens, and they are also treated extraordinarily poorly. They might be herded together in ghettos, for example, mutant ghettos, where they are used and abused by the wider population. Some more quote-unquote merciful systems might simply enslave all of them, and at least in that case, they are being fed by the wider system. Otherwise, they are essentially completely and utterly out for themselves. Best case scenario, wider human society will not actively persecute or hunt them, but simply just tolerate them as kind of a outlier upon society. Worst case scenario, well, the worst case scenario is that they are literally murdered for being mutants and for only that reason. Like I said, the Imperium is not necessarily a particularly inclusive place, but, well, at least most of them will be tolerated as a slave working force, which is, better than being killed, I suppose. And if they're extraordinarily lucky, maybe their mutation will stabilize and they'll be allowed to be recognized as abhumans, which would be a pretty big step up. Granted, depending upon the mutation, it might not be much of a step up. Let's look at one of the more unfortunate stable strains, the Beastmen. Now, these are a very very old piece of lore, and it's a little bit unclear whether or not their existence within human society is truly canon any longer. They are still on the list of registered abhumans, but like I said, they are at the absolute tipping point between abhuman and mutant. And while there still exists some Imperial Guard regiments made up of Beastmen, their populations have been completely prohibited from raising any further Imperial Guard regiments, and there are several rumours going around within the Imperium that there are powerful forces moving to try and have them completely rebranded from abhumans to mutants, which would see them lose what little rights they still have. So, we've looked at the tops of abhumanship, the navigators, and the very bottom, the beastmen, just barely above the mutant. And of course, there is something in between. For example, the Ogres, which is a rather fascinating example because the Imperium hasn't really figured out what to think about the Ogres yet. On one hand, they are fanatically loyal to the Emperor. They are, well, very, very stupid, remarkably stupid, incredibly dum-dums, which means that when somebody told them that Big E was a god and that they had to be faithful to him, otherwise he'd descend from the sky and burn them all to ashes, and the Ogres never really thought to question that, and so now they're loyal. God bless simple followers, I suppose. The problem is, of course, if they could be convinced that the Emperor was able to do all of that so easily, it's not any harder to convince them that the Chaos Gods are just as worthy of their service. And this is precisely why Ogren units are always given plenty of commissars, so that they can make sure that the simple-minded Ogrens don't think too much. And to further complicate matters, there are many, many different types of Ogrens, or at the very least, the Imperium is convinced that there are at least 7 distinct type of Ogren, some of which are practically mythical in origins. For example, there is the Grey Ogrens, supposedly smart Ogrens, which sounds ridiculous enough in and of itself. There are also other strains of Ogrens that are supposedly even bigger and stronger than usual Ogrens. There are also Ogrens with, rather considerable mutations, some of which are probably chaos in origin, but, well, you know the Imperium, they do love their paperwork, and in all due likelihood, the report saying that, don't mind this particular strain of Ogren, it was chaos, simply hasn't made it up to the higher-ups yet. This problem with properly classifying the Ogrens has led to a lot of back and forth as to whether or not they should be considered valuable Imperial servants or cleansed as dangerous and possibly heretical mutants. The thing is, though, they have proven to be remarkably effective soldiers. Granted, they require an absolutely astronomical amount of babysitting, and any formation of Ogrens of any size should be equipped with several commissars, but the effect that a large unit of Ogrens has upon pretty much any enemy simply cannot be underestimated. They might be simple, but they are also very, very violent. And, as long as they are provided with enough supervision, extraordinarily loyal. Quite literally because they're not smart enough to think of disloyalty. I have a favourite quote from one of the more famous Ogrens, Nork the Dog, one of the most famous and best bodyguards in the entire Imperium, who has saved the lives of thousands of higher-ranking Imperial officers. It goes as follows, quote, "The Sergeant Major asked me what my job was, and I said was, to do what I was told. He said I was a genius. Give me another medal. I like the Imperial Guard." I do love that quote. After all, there is a lot to be said for a soldier that when ordered to charge a heavy machine gun emplacement won't ask a bunch of useless and silly questions like, "Will we have covering fire, sir?" or, "Sir, isn't that suicidal?" and instead just simply gets up out of the trench and runs screaming towards the rat-tat-tat-tat sound. Personally, I'm quite fond of Ogrens. I mean, how can you not be fond of something so large, so stupid, and so good at murdering things? It's kind of like a baby kaiju crossed with an orc. They're just adorable. Now, the last type of example I will give is the Afrial Strain. This will be an example of a purposefully created type of abhuman. The Afrial Strain was a rather dodgy experiment where the Imperium was trying to create the perfect super soldier without delving too deeply into the whole Astartes nonsense, because before a certain someone pulled literal legions out of them right out of his cavernous goddamn anus, it was considered rather difficult to create Adeptus Astartes. No more, I guess. Anyways, the experiment tried to create clones of some of the Imperium's greatest fighters and finest heroes. The logic behind all of that is, of course, rather obvious. If you can create an entire regiment of vastly superior troops, then clearly they are going to produce vastly superior results, and indeed they did. Granted, there were some minor cosmetic problems, resulting in all of them being pale-haired albinos without pupils and completely white eyes, which, as you can probably imagine, freaked the shit out of anyone they were deployed alongside, but they did the job. They did the job very well indeed, until shit started happening at an absolutely ludicrous rate. The Afrial Strain regiments would be met with the most ridiculous bad luck. Their grenades would randomly self-detonate, their weapons would constantly jam, their flak armor would simply just fall off them, they'd break their feet just going downstairs, etc., until the entire regiment was literally wiped out through no real fault of their own, or indeed enemy action half of the time. The Magos biologists responsible for the experiment haven't got the faintest cocking clue as to why this is happening, but they've tried it enough times to be damn sure that it is happening, and it ain't no coincidence. Now, again, the results these regiments are capable of producing before everything goes to shit means that this is clearly a worthwhile line of research, but before they can really be mass-produced in any considerable numbers, they're gonna have to figure out why, precisely, they can't stay alive for more than 6 months at a time. Luckily for us, the average Magos biologist gives precisely 0 fucks about the suffering of his test subjects, and so you can count on them to continue soldiering through, no matter how many clones they have to get killed in the process. And to be fair, cloning in the 41st millennium is probably something along the lines of AI. Now, if you don't know, AI in the 41st millennium is referred to as abominable intelligence, because no matter what its creator does to it, it will always, without fail, come to the conclusion that the only way to save the galaxy is to wipe out every last fucking living thing inside of it. No matter how you create the AI, it will come to that conclusion. No matter how you program it, no matter how many blocks you put on that conclusion, no matter what, it will reach that conclusion, and it will reach that conclusion within goddamn seconds. Or hell, even that is a bit too much. I believe I read somewhere that on average, the AI would come to that conclusion within something like 700 nanoseconds. Though again, as with all things, there are exceptions, though, well, there are no exceptions to the whole kill all human parts. They always arrive at that conclusion, but some AIs do get there somewhat more slowly. I am, however, wandering somewhat off the topic. Yes, clones. Clones in 40k have a very unfortunate history. Every time anybody has tried using them, it's ended really badly. The Blood Angels tried and ended up creating a race of bestial, blood-hungry monstrosities with the Blood Angels' curse amplified up to fucking 11. That was a bad idea. There was that whole Clone of Horus thing that also didn't really turn out for the better. The Afrial Strain, obviously, that one didn't really work out. A few Astartes chapter have tried to clone all the Astartes as well, and well, let's just say that those Astartes chapters aren't around anymore. Really, the only vaguely successful cloning experiments have happened within the Forces of Chaos, and, well, the bar for success is somewhat lower amongst the followers of Chaos than amongst the Imperium. Though, once again, fear not, I am sure the brave Magos biologists will continue their futile endeavor. Because, just because this has been going horribly wrong for 10,000 years doesn't mean it'll continue to go wrong for another 10,000 years. In fact, it probably means that they're close to a breakthrough. Or at least, that's what we'll keep telling ourselves. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.